A nation didn't lose a war, it lost a bet, and that gamble erased a country from the map. Scotland did not fall to invading armies or burning castles at the end of the 17th century. No enemy banner was raised over Edinburgh. Instead, the kingdom collapsed quietly through account books, merchant ships, and a promise that felt too big to doubt. What followed was not a battlefield defeat, but a financial one, a single, reckless investment that drained a nation's wealth, shattered its confidence, and cornered Scotland into a choice that would erase its independence forever. Here's a rewritten version that keeps the gravity and rhythm while adding fresh imagery and flow. By the 1690s, Scotland was slipping into catastrophe. Relentless winters and sodden summers destroyed crops year after year, turning once productive farmland into wasteland. Rural communities emptied as hunger spread, and an economy dependent on agriculture simply imploded. Grain disappeared. Silver stopped circulating. Entire families vanished from the record. Existence itself became a daily gamble, and as global power moved away from armies and toward commerce, Scotland found itself stripped of both the blade and the balance sheet. Here's a refined cinematic rewrite that preserves the tension and stakes while using fresh language. South of the border, England was transforming itself into a commercial powerhouse, fueled by colonies across the Atlantic and beyond. Laws passed in London sealed those markets shut to Scottish merchants, cutting them off from the most profitable trade routes on earth. Ships sat idle. Opportunities vanished. Progress stalled. Scotland was pushed into an impossible dilemma: accept permanent decline or gamble everything on a single desperate escape. But when the doors to global trade are locked, how does a poor nation force them open? Here's a strong cinematic rewrite that keeps the meaning while sharpening the character and stakes. That supposed solution came wrapped in a single man, William Paterson. He was intelligent, charming, and deeply hazardous in the right or wrong hands. Paterson grasped the new mechanics of money and credit better than nearly anyone of his age, and he used that knowledge to sell Scotland an audacious promise: empire without the waiting. He gestured toward a narrow bridge of land in Central America and claimed it was the hinge of the world's trade. Settle it, he argued, and the wealth of every ocean would be forced to pass through Scottish hands. Here's another fully fresh version with different cadence and imagery. The proposal that would change everything arrived with one man, William Paterson. He was sharp-minded, magnetic, and profoundly risky to believe. Paterson understood the emerging world of banks, credit, and global commerce better than almost anyone of his generation. And he used that insight to offer Scotland an irresistible illusion: instant greatness. He drew attention to a narrow stretch of land in Central America and claimed it was the pivot of world trade. Establish a foothold there, he insisted, and merchants everywhere would be forced to follow. Control that passage, and the wealth of the world would flow towards Scotland on its own. Here's a cinematic rewrite that keeps the escalation and emotional pull while using fresh language. He painted a picture of abundance, fertile ground that never failed, welcoming inhabitants eager to trade in land supposedly untouched by European rivals. This place, he claimed, sat at the very crossroads of the world, a position so valuable it would make Scotland impossible to ignore. The promise was intoxicating. Lawmakers leaned in. Money followed without pause. What started as a commercial proposal quickly transformed into a patriotic crusade, a project onto which an entire nation projected its hopes. Here's a rewritten passage with the same meaning, heightened imagery, and clean narrative flow. Families liquidated farmland. Noble houses borrowed against generations of inheritance. Savings meant for survival were handed over without hesitation. Even household servants pooled their wages for a fragment of the dream. This wasn't calculated risk, it was desperation dressed as faith. Scotland didn't just invest heavily, it committed an extraordinary share of its national wealth to a single colonial venture. Court. They weren't buying shares. They were buying escape. Ships were acquired, colonists selected, warehouses filled. Yet the cargo itself exposed how deeply the promise had been misunderstood. Holds were stacked with thick woolen clothing, powdered wigs, stiff leather shoes, and thousands upon thousands of combs supplies suited for cold stone cities, not steaming rainforest. There were scarcely any seeds that could grow in tropical soil, few proper tools to clear jungle, and limited food that could survive the heat. The expedition carried ambition in abundance, but preparation was fatally thin. Here's a cinematic rewrite that keeps the irony and emotional contrast strong. As the ships departed, the harbors filled with celebration. Crowds gathered to shout blessings, banners snapped in the wind, and ministers offered prayers for fortune and safe return. Hope followed the fleet out to sea. What no one on shore realized was that the man who designed the dream had never laid eyes on the land he was sending them to claim. Here's a vivid rewrite of that section. The voyage devoured lives before they even touched land. Sailors and settlers fell to rot, tainted water, and disease crawling below deck. Yet hope clung stubbornly until the fleet reached Central America. Paradise? Nothing of the sort. They found swamp. The harbor was treacherous, the settlement planted in stagnant, mosquito-infested water. Illness spread like wildfire. Trade ground to a halt. The locals had no use for Scottish goods. No gold glittered in the rivers. No spices perfumed the air. The dream's engine sputtered and stalled before it could even start. Here's a way to write that section vividly. Then came the blockade. England, wary of provoking Spain, shut Scotland out completely. No supplies. No trade. No mercy. Ships passed the struggling settlement without so much as a glance. The colonists had coin, but in a world that refused to sell, money was worthless. Hunger spread. Desperation grew. The dream was fast becoming a nightmare. Rain drowned the camp. Supplies turned to sludge. Disease raced through the settlers faster than anyone could organize help. Men fell sick and then died every single day. Graves filled with water as quickly as they were dug. Morale crumbled. Even William Paterson, the man who had sold Scotland the dream, grew weak and feverish, forced to witness the empire he had promised dissolve in mud and misery. Within months, the survivors gave up. They abandoned the settlement entirely. Most never returned to Scotland. Those who died along the way were wrapped in the same wool coats they had brought for trade and consigned to the sea. As one historian put it, the investment didn't fail slowly, it rotted. But the disaster didn't stop there. Back in Scotland, news of the colony's collapse travelled slowly. Directors lied to Parliament and to investors. Rumours filled the gaps left by facts. Undeterred or blinded by hope, a second expedition set sail, loaded with more people, more supplies, more money. It was the last money Scotland had to give. They arrived to silence. The huts were burned. Graves were overgrown. The colony was dead. Trapped by relentless wind and dwindling food, the survivors had nowhere to go, and this time, Spain acted. Warships blockaded the harbor. Soldiers encircled the fort. Disease returned like a shadow over the weakened settlers. Resistance was short-lived. Surrender was inevitable. Scotland's dream of empire ended, not with a battle of swords, but with hunger, sickness, and disappointment. A nation had bet everything, and it was gone before it had ever truly begun. When the truth finally reached Scotland, panic swept through every town and manor. Wealth evaporated overnight. Trade stalled. Estates that had been mortgaged and sold fell into ruin. Banks and merchants collapsed under the weight of unpaid debts. The country was insolvent. Scotland hadn't just lost money. It had lost leverage, influence, and credibility. What had begun as hope became humiliation. A single investment had not only drained the nation's coffers, it had shaken the very foundations of its power. Anger turned outward. Crowds smashed windows, looted warehouses, and clashed with soldiers in the streets. Riots erupted from Edinburgh to the Highlands. Desperation became vengeance. English ships were seized, diplomats threatened, and in some cases, executions followed for those blamed most publicly. But rage couldn't refill the treasury. Coins lost at sea and in the jungle weren't coming back, and England knew it. They watched as Scotland's power crumbled, its economy shattered, its people humiliated, and they understood that a humiliated nation was a weakened nation. London offered a solution, calm and cold, a union. England would take on Scotland's staggering debts, every penny accounted for, every failure paid for. The catch was absolute. Scotland would surrender its sovereignty. The nation faced an impossible choice. Was independence worth bankruptcy, ruin, and starvation? Or was survival worth surrendering the power to make its own laws, control its own trade, and chart its own future? The question hung over Parliament like a guillotine, sharp and unavoidable. Parliament debated under armed guard, tempers flaring and voices raised in fury. Bribes moved quietly from hand to hand. Outside, protesters jammed the streets, shouting, marching, pleading. But inside, numbers ruled. Arithmetic outweighed patriotism. The ledgers of debt were heavier than the banners of freedom. In 1707, after centuries of kings and battles, of laws and legends, Scotland made the impossible choice. An 800-year-old kingdom legally dissolved. Independence became a memory. Survival became the price paid. Months later, wagons rolled into Scottish towns, spilling gold across streets and markets. To some, it was salvation, a chance to rebuild, to breathe again after years of famine and ruin. To others, it was betrayal, a bitter reminder that the price of survival had been their nation's freedom. The money stabilized the battered economy. New banks arose, their ledgers humming with commerce, laying the financial foundation that would later fuel the British Empire itself. The irony was unmistakable. The very fortune that had helped erase Scotland's independence now ceded a global power that would thrive on the union it had bought. Scotland never forgot Darien. The disaster was etched into the nation's memory like a scar, a story parents told their children and historians chronicled with bitterness. It became a warning whispered through generations. Ambition without capital is nothing more than a dream, beautiful but hollow. Independence without money is an illusion, fragile and fleeting, no matter how fierce the pride or how ancient the claim. Darien wasn't just a failed colony, it was a caution that shaped the choices, and the caution of a nation for centuries to come.